Greetings and thanks for stopping by today. Let me get my glasses on here. I'll be doing a little bit of reading in a moment from a book that I've been blessed by in the past year. By way of introduction, about a year ago, I was reading a book by C.S. Lewis called The Great Divorce. In this fictional narrative, he describes a scene where he comes across an individual named George MacDonald, a man from Scotland who lived quite some time ago. And through the conversation, in the midst of this narrative, I began to wonder if George MacDonald was a real person. So I stopped reading and did a little bit of research and found out, quite to my surprise, that George MacDonald was indeed a very interesting person who lived in the 1800s, and he was an author, had also been a pastor, but began to write books, novels, and poetry, and great tales of fantasy. And so, really, an outstanding writer, and yet someone I had never heard of. George MacDonald died in 1905, but his fairy tales and fantasy stories provided great inspiration for authors such as C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Lewis Carroll of Alice in Wonderland fame, and also Madeleine L'Engle, who's written quite a few books that young people really enjoy today. And I have many of these books in my library. And because I became enamored with George MacDonald as an outstanding writer, I began to acquire his books, and today I have about 10 of those titles in my library. One of them, one of the books that I have, is called The Lost Princess, and in fact, I believe this was the first one that I acquired. And this book, fascinating, a fairy tale that children have enjoyed, and so have parents for many, many years, decades, in fact. And I'd like to read just a little bit of it. The story is about two girls, one a princess, one from a more common background, and the lessons that they learn through the influence of a wise, old, but mysterious woman. Here we go, with starting on page 1 of The Lost Princess. There was a certain country where things used to go rather oddly. You could never tell whether it was going to rain or hail, or whether the milk was going to turn sour. It was impossible to say whether the next baby would be a boy or a girl, or even if the baby was a week old, whether he or she would wake up sweet-tempered or cross. In strict accordance with the peculiar nature of this country of uncertainties, it came to pass one day that a shower of rain fell that might be well called golden, for the sun shone through the drops as they fell, and every drop was good for a grain of golden corn, or a buttercup, or a dandelion. While this splendid rain was falling with a musical patter upon the great leaves of the horse-chestnut trees, and on the leaves of the sycamore trees, and on a multitude of flowers, of which some stood up and boldly held out their cups to catch their share, while this lovely rain was washing all the air clean, while it fell, splashing and sparkling with a hum and a rush and a soft clashing, while the rain was thus falling, and the leaves and the flowers and the sheep and the cattle and the hedgehog were all busily receiving the golden drops, something happened. It was not a great battle, nor an earthquake, nor a coronation, but something more important than all of those put together. A baby girl was born. Her father was a king, her mother a queen, and she had uncles and aunts who were princes and princesses, so the little girl was somebody. And yet, for all of that, strange to say, the first thing she did was to cry. I told you it was a strange country. As she grew up, everybody about her did his best to convince her that she was somebody, and the girl herself was so easily persuaded of it that she quite forgot that anybody had even told her so. That she was somebody she took for a fundamental, primary, firstborn, self-evident idea and principle, and far be it from me to deny it. I will even go so far as to assert that in this odd country there was a huge number of somebodies. Indeed, it was one of the oddities that every boy and girl in this country was rather too ready to think he or she was indeed somebody. And the worst of it was that the princess never thought of there being any more than one somebody, and that was herself. Far away in the north, in the same country, on the side of a bleak hill, where a horse chestnut tree or a sycamore tree was never seen, where there were no meadows with buttercups, only steep, rough, breezy slopes covered with dry, prickly firs with a few blossoms of red gold. There, among the hailstones and the heather and the cold mountain air, another little girl was born. Her father was a shepherd, and her mother a shepherdess, and she had uncles and aunts who were shepherds and dairymaids, and yet, would you believe it? She, too, cried the very first thing. It really was an odd country. And what is still more surprising, the shepherd and the shepherdess and the common aunts and uncles were not a bit wiser than the king and the queen and the royal aunts and uncles, for they too, one and all, so constantly taught the little child that she was somebody, that she also forgot that there were a great many more somebodies besides herself in the world. And so the story begins, and it's very interesting because these two little girls in the story grow to be young children. Obviously, they go from little babyhood to childhood. And the king's daughter, Rosamond, was very much overindulged by her doting parents, and she grew to care about no one but herself. And that girl's name was Rosamond. And then there's Agnes, the daughter of the poor shepherd. She was given constant praise by her parents and others, but was never corrected for her very poor behavior. So the two girls led very different lives, but each in her own way became really little tiny tyrants, making their parents live in great misery. Then a mysterious and wise old woman enters the story. She steals Rosamond and takes her to her home, her cottage in the forest. Now, no harm comes to the little princess. But using a magic mirror, the wise old mysterious woman shows Rosamond an image of herself, one that reveals what she really looks like, in a way, especially on the inside, and Rosamond is terrified by what she sees. Later, the wise woman says to Rosamond something very unique and very interesting. Let me turn to that page, and I will read it to you. "Look at me, Rosamond," said the wise woman. But Rosamond never moved, never even shrugged her shoulders. Perhaps they were already up to her ears and could go no further. "I want to help you. I want to help you to do what I tell you," said the wise woman. "So look at me." Still, Rosamond was motionless and silent, saying only to herself, "I know what she's after. She wants to show me her horrid teeth. But I won't look. I'm not going to be frightened out of my senses just to please her." "You had better look, Rosamond. Have you forgotten how you kissed me this morning?" But Rosamond now regarded that little throb of affection as a momentary weakness into which the deceitful ogress had betrayed her, and she almost despised herself for it. She was one of those people who are the more disagreeable the more they are coaxed. For such behavior, the wise woman, she had an awful punishment, but she remembered that the princess had been very badly brought up, and therefore wished to try her with all gentleness first. She stood silent for a moment to see what effect her words might have, but Rosamond only said to herself, "She just wants to fatten and eat me." And with such a little while since she had looked into the wise woman's loving eyes, thrown her arms around her neck and kissed her, that had been earlier in the day. "Well," said the wise woman gently, after pausing as long as it seemed possible she might be considering something, "I must tell you then, without your attention. Whoever listens with her back turned, listens but half, and gets but half the help." And so the story continues once again, and about that time, Rosamond manages to escape the cottage of the old, mysterious, but wise woman, and she went on her own little journey. And then it was at that point that the story continues, and the old woman actually takes Agnes away from her family and brings her to her cottage for the same reasons that she had brought Rosamond, to try and teach her what she really needed to know. So Rosamond escapes, and the wise old woman gently and patiently tries to help Agnes. And later in the book, we find out a little bit of her interaction with that young child as well. Speaking of Agnes, the story says, she never went into rages like the princess, and would have thought Rosamond awful, oh, so ugly and vile, if she had seen the princess in one of her passions. But for all of that, she was no better than the princess, and she was quite as ugly in the eyes of the wise woman, who could not only see, but actually read her face. What is there to choose between a face distorted to hideousness by anger and one so distorted to silliness by self complacency? Of the two very unpleasant creatures, I would say that the king's daughter would have been the worse, had not the shepherd's daughter been quite as bad. But as I have said, the wise woman had her eye upon Agnes. She saw that something special must be done, else she would be one of those who kneel to her own shadows till feet grow on their knees, then go down on their hands till their hands grow into feet, and then lay their faces on the ground until they grow into snouts. At last they are a hideous sort of lizard, each of which believes himself the best, wisest, and loveliest being in the world, indeed the very center of the universe, and so they run about forever, looking for their own shadows that they may worship them, and miserable because they cannot find them, being themselves too near the ground to have any shadows, and what becomes of them at last there is but one who actually knows. Well, the story continues on. I certainly do not wish to give away the ending of the story, but this book contains so much great wisdom and virtue for children who would read it for themselves or for parents who would read this book to them. But in addition to what the children can gain from the story, parents can also gain much as well. There is a great deal of wisdom in this book by George MacDonald, and it teaches wonderful truths based upon Scripture, especially the book of Proverbs. So, George MacDonald, the man who C.S. Lewis said of him, "He is my master." C.S. Lewis said this of George MacDonald, and he also said that there wasn't a book that C.S. Lewis wrote, but that he didn't borrow something from MacDonald's writing. And so this spoke to C.S. Lewis as he was beginning his work of writing great books for children and young people and for adults, and it continues even to this very day. So I recommend this book, The Lost Princess, for your own reading, and that maybe you would read it to your children. I hope you're able to find it and enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you for joining me today, and have a great day.